It's amazing the reception Godzilla Minus One has received. So many people, audiences and critics alike, praise it as the most recent great Godzilla film since Shin Godzilla. Now, don't get me wrong, I love that for this film. It's just that I always heard that people would prefer less human drama and more action with Godzilla. Now, to be fair, this is usually referred to America's current monsterverse, and honestly, I don't know which human characters I can care about less, the Monsterverse characters or the Fast and Furious, but this is not a negative video to act like Monsterverse doesn't have its own positives. But one thing I believe Godzilla Minus One did well is not only writing compelling human drama, but also using Godzilla as a plot device to tell a story about fear in different forms. Now, for some people, when you hear plot device, it has this negative connection to it. For example, you have a very weird plot device that happens in Star Wars Rise of Skywalker, where apparently the whole plot essentially is about rebels from point A going to point B, which is this planet, but no one knows the route to this planet, but it just so happens that these particular devices that have not been discussed or rumored or anything at all throughout the entire saga apparently is the exact device you need to discover this ancient planet that no one has heard of until now. So yeah, there's a lot of negative connotation when it comes to plot devices, but that can't be further from the truth about plot device equals bad. So just in case you don't know what a plot device is, according to a screenwriter website known as Studio Binder, a plot device is anything that moves a story forward. Now, this could be something material like a character or an object. For example, in Christopher Nolan's Memento, Leonard, who is the main lead, his entire body is a plot device. Leonard is an amnesiac man who can't remember anything after a short stretch of time. So to cope with this condition, Leonard tattoos his body with clues and deductions that point him towards a killer. Now these clues, scattered across his body as a canvas, are storytelling devices that drive the story forward. In this case, Godzilla is the object that moves the story forward, but is still very essential to this story. Godzilla is the physical manifestation of PTSD in this film. Throughout this story, the name of Godzilla causes traumatic memories for these characters. The best example is the protagonist, Koichi Shikishima. Koichi is a kamikaze pilot that abandons his duty and lands at a repair site, claiming that his plane needs repairs, but in reality, Koichi had cold feet, and the repairman Tachibana notices as well. At this point, Godzilla is more of a local legend than a global threat. But after Godzilla arrives at the repair site and Koichi refuses to take the shot at the monster with his machine guns, Godzilla is now imprinted in Koichi's mind. Not just because the monster destroyed the repair site, but because Godzilla exposed Koichi's weakness, which was fear. We see Koichi fear death the moment Godzilla appears, and when the opportunity came to attack Godzilla, he chose himself. And this led to the slaughter of his country repairman, leaving Tachibana as the sole survivor of his crew. Watching that decision that kicked off the film, it subconsciously displayed to me the cultural differences from Japan and America. I'm American, so whether we want to believe it or not, we are subconsciously built to have an individualistic perspective. Americans aren't necessarily known for altruism. Altruism to Americans is seen as foolish unless there's something in it for us. But for Japanese culture, at least to my admitted limited knowledge, individualism is frowned upon, and seeing the consequences of Koichi choosing individualism was the most interesting to see. We see this play out when Koichi returns home to see his house and essentially the neighborhood ruined due to American bombing. When his neighbor sees that someone she recognizes is alive, typically this is a cause for joy. But her witnessing Koichi turned away from his honorary death to instead choose himself haunts Koichi, because choosing himself killed others. But if we are going to talk about Koichi and his journey, then we have to also talk about his housemate Noriko. Now, very rarely is romance in cinema effective for me. I wish I remembered who said it, but essentially, it feels like writers have a very simplification of how people fall in love. So it causes romance on the big screen to appear fake at times, but Godzilla Minus One takes an approach that worked for me. The time skip approach was highly effective as it allowed the reality of romance to blossom. And what I mean by that is, most romance plots are told within a 1 month to 2 month time frame, and when we do see these characters interact, we don't really see why they like each other. The writers just tell us, hey, this person likes this person, and expects us to fall in line without laying the necessary groundwork to make that believable. What this story does is use a time skip to allow time to pass for years, allowing the audience to have an easier believability that two strangers with an unrelated child could fall in love in that time frame. For Noriko, her journey is a perspective of the citizens of post-war Japan. We're introduced to a young, scared woman that still had the courage to provide for a child that wasn't hers. Similar to how during this time, community was most important because everyone suffered. Then, years later, Noriko decides to spread her wings and appears optimistic of the future, just like the post-rebuild era for Japan. It's not until Godzilla shows up in Ginza and uses his heat ray, causing buildings and people to be flown away, is when we see Godzilla's role of being feared but also seen as a nuclear weapon for the post-war survivors. Noriko's death is also a reflection of the result of destructive power, as Koichi is left hopeless, once again feeling survivors' guilt. Koichi seeks forgiveness from the people beyond the dead, but feels like through every scenario he is punished instead. This is what causes him to come to the false conclusion that the only way to right his wrongs is to complete his role as a kamikaze pilot. This false conclusion stems from his failures in the beginning of the film, which are also one of the causes of his emotional breakdowns we see during his late night conversation with Noriko. And I know I might be in a minority saying this, but for me, his most emotional scene, which is the scene where he was with Noriko and telling her the truth of what happened on the island, it almost felt like a man who was confused but yet found slight hope that his ignorant assumption was correct. Even if it wasn't true that he died, he tried to become ignorant to his reality in order to find closure. But what he learned is that his attempt at closure was misplaced. And this brings up the wonderful supporting cast in this movie. Everyone had something at stake and commentary to the story. We saw the veterans fighting Godzilla to provide a future for the young, and Koichi needed the most help, and he was saved by his vengeful neighbor and homies that showed him that killing yourself won't bring back the dead, but instead live for them. The ones who sacrificed their life so their country can have a brighter tomorrow. And that's why I love the repairman from the opening scene, Tachibana, in this film so much. Tachibana has all the reasons to hate Koichi, and for a while he did, until Koichi needed his help to repair the airplane. And the scene with Koichi in this prototype airplane, having the determination in his eyes that he will fulfill his role as a kamikaze pilot, struck chords with Tachibana. Even with the fear that Tachibana has developed due to his encounter with Godzilla, he noticed that Koichi needed fear to not control him, but use that fear as leverage. An example of this is during the final battle. Now, Kenji Noda, the ex-Navy technician friend of Koichi, creates this interesting plan to essentially keep Godzilla at the depths of the ocean, and Kenji and the other cast members display fear during this battle. You could even say cautious optimism. Now, this next part is more of a headcanon than an actual fact, but I'd like to believe Godzilla themselves doesn't have fear. Now, why would they? Godzilla doesn't seem like they're uneducated, with the heat ray and the ability to attack on land and water. Godzilla fell into their own hype. And again, at least in my headcanon. That's why Godzilla was so easily fooled by the humans' plans. But the moment that really excited me was Koichi and his daring attempt to kill Godzilla. This was probably the biggest example of leveraging fear in the story. Koichi fools everyone by going full speed just as Godzilla is igniting his heat ray. But this doesn't scare Koichi because he has the eject button that traditional Japanese fighter jets didn't have for the war. And just a quick note, this was a great moment of growth for both Koichi and Tachibana, but also could be seen for Japan as a whole during this time period. It's the result of seeing that some traditions should be kept in the past and embrace new ideas that might contradict the culture. And we see this mindset of being progressive in the opening scene when a repairman provides a rhetorical question to Koichi, which is, what is the point of sacrificing your life when you already know how it's gonna end? And Koichi uses that same mindset when he jams his fighter jet in Godzilla, causing Godzilla to be defeated. And this was all thanks to embracing new ideas that may have been frowned upon to early generations, such as the ability to eject out of the kamikaze airplane. Look, this film has so many layers to it, and even elements that, when you ponder more, can be explored into multiple directions. This is what makes a great kaiju movie, at least to me. It's not CGI, even though they did a good job in this, and it doesn't need to be a mindless action-heavy flick. Stories always reign supreme, and this film is a testament on how to use an IP, such as Godzilla, to tell a compelling human story that many people across the globe can relate to. And for that, I thank the creative team for putting this in theaters because it truly deserves a theatrical experience.